The sun was already high overhead, shining its hot rays through the torn curtains, covering the pale face of a young girl lying dozing in the corner of the old wooden house. Her breathing was slow and tired, as if each inhalation made her thin chest ache. "Sister, why are you sleeping for so long?" A clear childish voice rang out, followed by a worried smile. It was Maya, the 4-year-old daughter of Huyn, the kind woman who had taken care of Tu Vi for the past few days. Maya ran over, gently shaking the strange woman's hand. The little girl didn't understand everything that was going on, but her innocent round eyes clearly felt a sadness covering this house like darkness swallowing the light. Huyn walked out of the kitchen, holding a bowl of steaming porridge. Her voice was as gentle as the morning mist. "Maya sings very well. Let Maya sing for you." She sat down next to the bed, placed the bowl of porridge on the old table, and looked at Tu Vi, the girl with a pale face and eyes that were still closed. Memories flashed through Huyn's mind like thin cuts. The image of Tu Vi collapsing in front of her house for the first time, covered in mud, trembling and exhausted, like a broken-winged bird falling here, hoping to find some shelter. Where did that girl come from? Why was she alone in such a miserable state? Where did this girl come from? Huyn muttered, a strange feeling rising in her heart. Tu Vi moved slightly. Her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but instead of a voice, there was only a sigh as if she was lamenting a lifetime. She looked so pitiful. I wonder who is chasing her. Huyn thought to herself. Looking more closely, Huyn realized that the girl's eyes, though closed, still retained a look of terror. Something had just happened, something terrible that would make such a young girl run away. She looked so tired. Huyn gently placed her hand on Tu Vi's forehead, feeling her skin burning like fire. Elsewhere, in a wooden house a few miles away, an old mother sat quietly looking out at the forest. Her eyes, dimmed by age, still seemed to reflect an undisguised anxiety. Why hasn't my daughter-in-law, that Tu Vi, come back since yesterday? She just went to get some firewood. Mrs. Ha's heart felt like it was on fire. She was Tu Vi's mother-in-law, an old, weak woman who loved her daughter-in-law like her own daughter. Since the day she got married, she had always loved Tu Vi because of her gentleness, her ability, and her filial piety. But now, something must have happened, she muttered, her hands fingering the rosary beads as if praying for a miracle. But then she looked across the house, where her own son Hugh was lying there, sleeping soundly without a care. His husband. That guy doesn't care about anything. All he does is party and hang out all day. He's someone else's husband, but he's been gone for days without paying any attention to his wife. She sighed quietly, her eyes filled with tears. Hugh, where are you? Tu Vi hasn't come back yet, do you know? The house was empty, not a sound. The wind blew in through the crack in the door, shaking the old wedding photo hanging on the wall, the photo she often looked at when she missed Tu Vi. In the photo, Tu Vi smiled lightly, his eyes exuding a gentleness that she didn't know if she would ever see again. She stood up, leaned on her cane and walked towards the kitchen, still calling. Hugh, go home and find your wife. She hasn't come back for a few days since she went to get firewood. There was no answer. She shook her head, her eyes downcast, her heart aching. I'm old, too weak. I can't go find her anymore. Tu Vi, where are you? Why did you take so long? Elsewhere, Maya, the obedient little girl, quietly pulled her mother's hand. Mom, she slept for so long. Why didn't she wake up? She's tired. My child. Let her rest a little more. Maya is good. Don't make noise. Yes, Then Mom, I'll cook porridge for you. Eat so you can feel better. Hwin smiled, her eyes looking at her little daughter gently. Little Maya didn't understand much, but she was like a little angel who knew how to comfort her mother when she was most tired. Inside the house, Tu-Vi opened her eyes slightly. Her gaze was still dull. She whispered, "Here." "Where is here?" Maya shouted. "You're awake. Sister, eat some porridge. Do you feel less tired?"
Tu-Vis trokkel tog sit op.
Her body was trembling, her face pale to the point of fear. She softly said, "Thank you. The porridge is too hot. But I'm still so tired." She tried to smile, but the smile faded. In the depths of her eyes, so many unspoken feelings were being suppressed. An 18-year-old girl, forced to marry at 16, not yet understanding what life was tied to an unjust marriage. She used to be a child in a poor mountainous area, living in a cruel custom of early marriage, being taken as a wife like a commodity. Now, her husband wanted to sell her to Cambodia, turning her into a commodity once again, this time a living commodity in exchange for money. And worse, she had a serious illness. The fevers and headaches tormented her every night, making her think she wouldn't live until the next morning. Tu-Vi sat huddled in the corner of the bed, her eyes staring blankly at the bowl of porridge in front of her. The 18-year-old girl was now nothing more than a shadow, pale, so fragile that a gust of wind could blow her down. "Don't be sad anymore." Maya's voice rang out again, sweet as a lollipop in the middle of a cold winter day. "Eat some porridge to ease your fatigue." Hwin brought the bowl of porridge over, softly coaxing. "Don't be afraid. It's just me and my mother here. No one can harm you." Those words were like a drop of water falling onto the frozen lake. Tu-Vi shivered slightly. After a long while, her voice became hoarse. "Yesterday, 2 people came here. They were looking for you, right?" "Yes, I saw them, but I told them to go in another direction." Hwin replied, her voice as light as a breeze. Tu-Vi choked and bowed her head.
I'm sorry.
I've bothered you so much. It's okay. Just stay here, and when you feel better, we'll figure it out. But tell me the truth. Who are those 2 people? Why are they chasing you like that?" That question made Tu-Vi's thin body tremble slightly. Her eyes were sparkling as if they were about to burst. And then, in a gasp, she blurted out the truth. They were going to sell me to Cambodia." Hwin was stunned. "Sell me? Oh my God. What are you talking about? Who are they? Do you know them?" Tu-Vi bowed her head, her face suddenly looking 10 years older. A tear fell into the bowl of porridge. "It's my husband." The space was silent for a long time. There was only the gentle sound of the fan, and somewhere, the sound of a forest bird crying out in grief. Hwin clenched her hands. From Tu-Vi's voice to her eyes, she understood that this was no joke. That girl was living in a real hell. Tu-Vi spoke softly, her voice breaking into pieces. "I got married at the age of 16, because my village had a custom of capturing wives. I was going to the market when I was dragged back to be his wife. My mother-in-law was sick. My husband was playful. Now he's selling me like a commodity. I'm so scared, sister. I want to go home to my mother-in-law. She loves me so much." At home, Mrs. Ha Tu-Vi's mother-in-law sat by the door, her eyes looking towards the deep forest. On days without her daughter-in-law, she felt the house was strangely cold and empty. "Tu-Vi, you went to get firewood yesterday. Why haven't you come back yet? I'm so worried." She picked up Tu-Vi's old shirt, gently inhaling the fabric smell, the musty smell of sweat, of kitchen smoke, of the daughter-in-law she considered her own daughter. She's so gentle, so hard-working. Ever since she became a daughter-in-law, she's never let me go hungry. She thought to herself, her eyes already brimming with tears. And that Hugh, oh my God, he's been gone for days without a trace. And he didn't even bother to ask where his wife is. What kind of husband is that? She stood up trembling, leaned on her cane and called out loudly, Hugh, go home and find your wife. She's been gone for days. My daughter-in-law. That Tu Vi. No one answered. There was only the wind blowing through the faded curtains. Mrs. Ha sat down heavily on the chair, breathing heavily. Her old heart felt like it was being squeezed. Tu Vi, where did you go? If something happened to you, how could I live? On the other side, when she heard Tu Vi mention her mother-in-law, Huyn raised her head. Her eyes shone with admiration. You still remember your mother-in-law? Tu Vi nodded. She loves me so much. One day when I was sick, she cooked porridge and fed me spoon by spoon. I went to get firewood to cook medicine for her. Now that I'm leaving like this, I'm afraid she'll worry. Huyn bit her lip. She remembered her own past, a wife who was rejected by her husband's family because she couldn't give birth to a son, kicked out of the house, and had to raise her child alone. I'm lucky, because I have a loving mother-in-law. Huyn whispered, try hard, for her, and for yourself. Tu Vi was silent. Tears flowed down. She hugged Maya, a strange girl, but now it was like a string holding her broken heart. In another corner, Hugh the bad husband was wandering in the forest with a stranger, his face scowling. Where did that little girl go? I told you to tie her up tight. It's easy for you to say. The little girl is so weak. Who would have thought she could run so fast? Fuck. Find her for me. I got the deposit. They screamed, stomped their feet, called for more people to look for her. But they didn't know that even if they searched for their whole lives, they would never find the heart of a broken woman. Tu Vi cowered in the darkness, tears falling non-stop as painful memories came flooding back. In the corner of her eyes was a sky full of resentment and resentment. At 18 years old, the age when many people still dream of school, of first love, she was already a wife forced to marry, forced to be the wife of a man she never chose. The voice of the old woman, her mother-in-law, still echoed somewhere in her head. Tu Vi, why don't you come back from collecting firewood? I look after you every day. Each word was like a needle piercing her heart. She, that old, weak woman, was not her blood, but she was the only person in this world who truly loved her. During the days living with her husband's family, she was the rare person who held her hand, looked at her with gentle and sorrowful eyes. She choked up thinking of her mother-in-law at home. Her body sick, but her heart was in turmoil. I wonder if she has eaten anything, or is she just sitting and waiting for her daughter-in-law like a mother waiting for her lost child in the deep forest. In the distance, in the old house, Tu Vi's mother-in-law is still sitting by the window, her hands trembling as she reads her rosary. Her eyes are dim, but she is always looking towards the distant forest, where her daughter-in-law left and has not returned. Her voice whispers, Tu Vi, why have you been gone for so long? Do you know that I have been watching you every minute and every hour? That Hugh. He doesn't care at all. He didn't even bother to ask after you for days. She feels guilty, blaming herself for being too weak to protect her gentle daughter-in-law. In her heart, Tu Vi is no different from her own daughter. On the days when Tu Vi has a fever, she still cooks porridge and puts a cold towel on her forehead. On the days when Tu Vi's husband ignores her, wandering around drinking, she is the only one who sits next to Tu Vi, asking after her, comforting her. She once told her, "If there is a next life, I will be your biological mother, so that you will not have to suffer like this anymore." Her voice gradually faded in a fit of coughing. She mumbled as if talking to herself, "I am old, too weak. I no longer have the strength to look for her. If only I could go. If only I were a few decades younger. I would go all over the mountains and forests to find you." Meanwhile, Tu Vai was still hiding in the small house where Maya and Huyn, the kind stranger, took care of her. Night fell. The flickering light of the oil lamp shone on her pale, bony face. Maya lay sleeping soundly beside her, still holding her hand tightly, small but strangely warm. Tu Vai whispered, "Mom, I want to go home. I miss you. I'm afraid you're waiting. Don't get any sicker. As long as you're still alive, I will overcome all difficulties to return to you." Her tears rolled down, hot as if burning her cheeks. She was not only running away from human traffickers, but also from an unjust fate, from the bottomless pit called child marriage, and selling herself as a wife. Recalling the scene in the village when she was forced to be a wife at that time, she was only a 16-year-old girl, not yet understanding what love was. That night, they raided her house, tied her hands and took her away like merchandise. Her mother fainted, her father cried silently, and then, she was handed over to a strange man, her current husband, who now wanted to sell her to Cambodia to get money to buy a new car. Huyn's words echoed in the cold night, waking her up from the stream of memories filled with blood and tears. "You have to live, Tu Vai. You have to go back. For your mother-in-law, the one who loved you like a daughter. You are luckier than me, because at least you still have a mother-in-law who loves you." Tu Vai clenched her hands, the calloused hands of an unfortunate young wife. She nodded. Yes, she would not fall. She would live for her mother-in-law, for herself, and for all the other girls who were in the same situation as her. She would return at all costs. It was getting dark. The wind blew through the treetops. The fallen leaves fluttered, touching the thin face of Tu Vai, the young girl who was dragging her tired steps in the middle of the deserted forest. Her legs were bleeding, her pants were torn, her shoulders were shaking. But Tu Vai's eyes still shone with a small hope that somewhere, her old and weak mother-in-law was waiting for her to return, and little Maya was still whispering, "Auntie, wake up and eat porridge." In her head, the words her mother-in-law used to remind her with care echoed. "Tu Vai, remember to bring warm clothes, the mountains are cold. If it rains and you come back late, I'll wait for you." That voice was unusually warm, making her heart ache. People often say, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law often hate each other. But between her and her mother, Mrs. there was a sacred relationship, not needing blood to be still full of affection. She was the first person to know that Tu Vai was beaten, the one who gave her medicine, hiding her tears behind the curtain every time she saw her daughter-in-law burying her face in the pillow. Many times, she shouted at Hugh, "Are you still human to make her suffer?" But now, she was at home, alone and sick. Tu Vai knew she was in a lot of pain. She felt her heart clench. What if she didn't make it back in time? Who would take her to the doctor? Who would cook porridge and feed her spoonfuls, massage her arms and legs every time the weather changed? But she couldn't go back. Hugh, the bastard husband, had received a deposit from human traffickers. She knew clearly that if she fell into his hands again, she would probably be taken to the border Cambodia, where so many young girls had disappeared without a trace. The sound of hurried footsteps behind her made Tu Vai's heart clench. She held her breath and hid behind a large tree, hugging herself tightly. The familiar voices rang out, harsh and cold. That girl must still be in this forest. I told you she's so sick and weak. Yet she runs so fast. We have to catch her, or we'll all die. The Cambodians are waiting. The wind howled again, carrying with it the gasps and curses of the people who were hunting her. Tu Vi trembled, but she didn't cry. She wasn't allowed to fall. She still had her mother-in-law. She still had a promise to her that she would live, that she would return. Not far from the forest, in a dilapidated tin-roofed house, Mrs. Ha lay curled up on the bed. Her frail body shook from time to time because of the recurring fever. Her eyes, blinded by age, still turned towards the door whenever there was a strange noise. She called her daughter-in-law's name countless times in her dreams. Tu Vi, where are you? Come back. Mom is so cold. Hugh was only worried about his broken car, worried about the money he had received but not delivering the goods. Mrs. Ha was weak but still tried to lean on her cane to the door, stood in front of her son and gritted her teeth. Do you still have a heart, Hugh? She is your wife, my daughter-in-law. How could you do that? Hugh avoided his mother's eyes, turned away. But Mrs. Ha still stood there, her small figure but as strong as an old tree in the middle of a storm. A mother's heart has never accepted evil, even though the one who committed the crime was her own son. I don't need money. I need my daughter-in-law to live. She is sick. She is ill, and yet you still want to sell her? If she dies, you will have killed 2 lives, her and mine. Hugh stood still for a few seconds, then threw the wrench down hard and walked straight. His heart was torn apart without words. But he still did not stop. Money had taken him too far. In the forest, Tu Vi continued walking, now under the pale moonlight. She muttered to herself, "It's not my fault. It's just that my fate is too cruel." She thought about her childhood. At 16, she was forced to be a wife, according to the custom of early marriage in the mountains. She didn't know what love was. She had never lived a day for herself. Then when she went to her husband's house, not long after, she was beaten, scolded, and treated like a commodity. The stomach cancer silently tormented her body. Every night she was in excruciating pain but didn't dare to cry out, afraid that her mother-in-law would feel sorry for her. But now, she was the only one who still loved her. "Mom, if I survive tonight, I will come back. I will take care of you until my last breath." A tear silently fell onto her hand. Then another. Then her whole face was drenched in silence. No one heard. There was only the forest trees, the night wind, and the cold stars. In the cold forest night, Tu Vi walked aimlessly, each rapid breath blending with the whistling wind. She didn't know how far she had escaped from those people, who were chasing her like a living commodity. In the dim moonlight, she sat down by the tree, hugging her cold legs and whispered, "Mom, I want to go home. I'm so tired." At the age of 18, the age when she should have been studying and living carefree, she was burdened with the injustices of life. Early marriage, forced to become a wife at the age of 16, then sold by her own husband, and now, carrying a smoldering illness, she had become a hunted person, alone in the deep forest. In the distance, in the dilapidated wooden house at the foot of the mountain, her mother-in-law, a sick woman, was still sitting waiting for her daughter-in-law at the doorstep, her cloudy eyes scanning with each gust of wind. "Tu Vi, where are you? Why haven't you come back these past few days? If something happens to you, how will I live?" Although they are not related by blood, the affection between her and Tu Vi is a close bond, tied by the days of poverty but still taking care of each other. To her, Tu Vi is not only a daughter-in-law, but also the only girl in her life who knows how to apply medicine, pour tea, and call mother with every gentle breath. In that moment, from the deep forest, Tu-Vi looked up at the night sky, her eyes filled with tears. If I am still alive, I will come back. I will not make you wait like this. Growing Heart, thank you for reading this far. If you find Tu-Vi's story touching your heart, thank you for sympathizing with the fragile fates in real life, the women who are suffering silently. I hope you will continue to follow the story, and if possible, leave a word of encouragement, because you yourself are a light of hope on this journey.